So today for our negative space watercolor painting, we're going to take one page of our mixed media sketchbook paper, and if you have masking tape at home, this is an optional step, but you can tape off along each side of your paper all along all four edges, and this is going to help stretch your paper to help prevent it from wrinkling and warping as much, because we're going to be adding several layers of paint to this. So if you have masking tape, this is a great option. So the next step is to grab a ruler and a pencil, and we're going to very lightly create an 8 by 10 inch frame inside of this 9 by 10 inch piece of paper. So if you'll drop down from that top long edge just a little ways and create a 10-inch line, making sure it's nice and parallel to the edge of your paper. And then you can create an 8-inch line on the two short sides, and then it should meet up with a 10-inch line along the bottom edge. Now, it doesn't really matter if the frame around all four sides is perfectly even, we just want to make sure it's not right up against the edge of the paper. So the supplies that you'll need today are your watercolors and paintbrush, a paper towel and your water cup, and then for optional supplies, you can use some table salt, just plain regular salt, and a little bit of plastic wrap, cling wrap from your kitchen. Now, if you choose to use these, here's what they look like when you apply them to a wet watercolor. Now we're going to choose another analogous color scheme, picking 3 to 4 colors that are beside each other on the color wheel. So I'm going to choose blue violet, blue, blue green, and green for my color range today, but you pick whichever colors you would like that's an analogous color scheme. If you have plastic wrap, you may also want to go ahead and tear off a piece and set it off to the side that's a little bit bigger than your piece of paper, and make sure that you have your salt handy in case you want to use salt as well. So the very first step, we are going to take just a wet paintbrush and wet the entire surface of that piece of paper within that 8 by 10 inch frame. So you may have to look at the paper from an angle to sort of see the glare to make sure that you're covering that whole area with water. By wetting your paper first, this is going to let the watercolors flow in a really interesting, pretty pattern across your paper as you drop on all of the different colors that you're going to be using. This is a very fun effect where the paint gets to bleed and flow very freely. Then you're going to very quickly mix up some of your colors for your analogous color scheme on your paint palette, and while this paper is still wet with water sort of sitting on the surface, you are going to sort of add some drips and brush strokes all across this paper. You want to cover the entire surface and not leave any white spaces. It's very important that everything get a layer of color on it. It doesn't really matter which colors go where. I sort of just let the paint kind of flow together and create just some really abstract patterns, but I want to make sure that there's no white left anywhere within that 8 by 10 frame, and everything is just a nice medium value wash of color, because remember, with watercolors everything's going to dry a little bit lighter than they look when they're wet. Now you can stop here once you have everything covered and let this dry, but if you want to do these optional steps, this part is really fun. You can take some of your table salt and sprinkle it over top of your paint while it is still wet, and this is going to create a really fun sort of subtle starburst effect because the salt will absorb the paint wherever it's sitting on the surface. That's one option. You can also take your saran wrap and spread it out over top of the surface and sort of crinkle it up to where there are wrinkles in it, and then leave it alone just like that until it's completely dry. Next, you're going to be deciding what you would like your painting to be of. So we'll create little paper templates to trace, and you want to pick a simple shape that's identifiable by just the outline of it. So you'll need a scrap sheet of mixed media paper to make your paper templates, the shapes that we'll be tracing onto our painting. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can make your template. You can use a printed picture from the internet, like I've printed some butterflies to use for this example. If you place those behind your paper and then hold that up to a window at your house, this will let you see the shape perfectly with that light coming through it, and you can trace it directly onto your paper. That's a great technique to use for this project. Or you can also just freehand draw the shape that you want to use, but you are welcome to look at resource images from the internet for this assignment. So there's my first butterfly, but I think to make mine a little bit more interesting, I want to create more than one butterfly shape. So I'm going to create two for this particular example, and that's okay for you to do as well, as long as it's multiples of the same thing. I wouldn't want to do a butterfly and a flower, for example. I'd want to stick with just one type of shape. So these shapes, you want them to be fairly simple, because one really important thing about this project is we will be painting around them in the negative space, so you want to make sure that it's a shape that you can easily paint around. Once you have the 1 to 3 shapes you want to use, you're going to very carefully cut those out and save them for later. Another way that you could go about doing this project, here's another example, would be if you wanted to free hand draw your designs. So here I've done just a sample of some different fall leaf shapes, and I just looked at a picture from the internet to help me see what shapes I should draw, but this is a good option in case you don't have access to a printer. Once you've finished your shapes, hang on to those until we move on to the next steps of our painting.